Joining us in the studio this hour is engineer Maurice Akech, who is the executive director of the NCA, which is the National Construction Authority. Engineer, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to all of you and all Kenyans.
I want to welcome you to the show this morning. The way which we do that is with a proverb, which you know. And CT is in a different African country this week. And he'll tell us a proverb, and he'll tell us what you think about it and how we can apply it. Is that all right?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Okay, now this country has something very interesting and unique about it. There are others, but I'm picking on one. This is a hint that should make it easy for you to tell us which country you think it is. Source of the Nile is found within its borders. Which country are we talking about?
That's our neighbor.
Which one?
Must be Uganda.
Good man. Engineer here attended geography classes and he passed his geography.
Which was necessary.
It was very necessary.
It's a requirement for civil engineering class.
Yes, I was going to say. Engineers, they must know their whereabouts.
That is absolutely correct. First attempt, 100%.
Yeah.
Well done. Yes. Now the proverb. Do not look where you fell, but where you slipped. Do not look where you fell, but where you slipped.
It's a good one. I think it gives us a reflection of we need to think of the beginning or the cause, not the outcome. Because it's the cause that if you don't focus on it, it will end up with either a good or a bad thing. For instance, for you to fall and you slip from the fact that you did not analyze or did not check where you are stepping on, literally, I'm interpreting it, where you are stepping on to give you an understanding of the risk so that you don't end up falling. And it's very relevant what you want to discuss today, because we want to discuss today, want to talk about even how you need to do your building so that it's safe, so that it does not cause accidents in terms of slippage. Make sure the floor is not slippery. Yeah.
There you go. And that's just interesting because now we're talking about construction, and obviously we're looking into the building code, and we're saying ensuring structural integrity. And when we think about this, engineer, we're just jumping into the conversation. We think about this, and unfortunately, the first thing that comes to our minds is, sadly, the number of buildings around the city, around the nation, that have a crack or that have, collapsed. Whether they be schools, whether they be, apartment blocks, the ones that are currently cracking. And so we want to ask ourselves the question, on the road to structural integrity, how far down that road are we in the right direction?
Well, I know for a long time, we've had issues of buildings collapsing. Also, for a long time, we've been coming up with strategies to ensure that that does not happen. And I'm happy that in this room today, on the 13th of January 2025, very early in the year, we're having a conversation to tell Kenyans and the world that we have now come to a stage where this is going to be a thing of the past because of some of the things and measures we put in place to ensure that they don't happen. Of course, buildings collapse because of a number of reasons. One is maybe not having good standards in place. Two, poor workmanship, which is attributed to what you talked about, the skills development. With good skills, there'll be good workmanship or quality workmanship. The other could be poor or substandard materials, which is also addressed in the new building code. The other one is what I would call inadequate designs by the professionals, that's professional input, or lack of implementation of a good design that has been done by the professionals. This is attributed to maybe the developers or space and so many other things. So in a nutshell, even though we've had a number of buildings collapsing in the past, but in the recent past, you've seen a decline in that trend. And if they do happen, you've also seen what we call safe or minimal impact in terms of loss of lives. Of course, when a building collapses, a property is still lost, but loss of lives has now also become minimized. But so also to say that in this space, in the last 10 years, and the graph has been growing gradually, exponentially, taking a very steep curve, that the number of sites under construction have actually increased compared to the number of buildings collapsing. That has significantly reduced. I also want us to underscore that, because with the coming in of devolution, we are aware that now the whole country, I can call it a construction site space, because every county you go to, there is construction, whether it's a building, whether it's a road, whether it's hospital, whatever type of building it is. In fact, it's never been this high. But compared to the incidences we're having in terms of construction collapsing, that has significantly reduced. And with the new building code 2024, this is why we are saying the panacea or the kiwa or the key to addressing that challenge is embedded in this book, which is National Building Code 2024, with 517 paragraphs or chapters, divided into 24 different topics to address that issue, cutting across all spectrum of construction, from design all the way to maintenance.
Was there a building code before 2024?
Yes.
There was. What was it called?
It was called National Building Code 1968.
1968.
It's been over 50 years for us to come up with this.
This one that was called 1968 is what was in operation and what people used as a guide until the end of 2024, essentially. It
is in operation until when this becomes effective in the next 2 or 2.5 months, 1st March 2025. This building code was published in 2024, March, but it has a provision for transition. When you come up with a new thing, you need to give opportunity for phasing out the old as you bring in the new. You cannot just come up with a new thing and say, from today on, we start. So you give opportunity for any ongoing development, construction, stakeholders to onboard the new idea as they'll phase out the old idea. And that's what we are doing. And this particular code, from 1st March 2025, in the next few months, it will become effective. And going forward, we'll be carrying out all our inspections, all our quality assurance, all our compliance checks using this as the Bible.
Engineer, City, go first.
No, go ahead.
The questions are many.
When we talk about, let's even talk about the 1968 code. There are very many buildings in this country that have been built using that code and have always stood the test of time, which goes to indicate that someone dropped the ball somewhere, because they did not follow what was in that code. And even as we have the 2024 code, what guarantee is there that the ball still will not be dropped?
Well, you may agree with me that a number of things have changed since 1968, but the code has remained where it is from 1968. So people have attempted to change, and that has caused what I can call chaos in terms of what you do versus what has been provided in the standard. For instance, when you talk about glazing, look at this room. You can see glass all over.
What is glazing?
So it's like something you do to a cake.
I'm coming to that. That's glass.
Isn't it? Some kind of confectionery.
When you talk about what you provide for lighting, it's called a see-through glass. It's called glazing. In the old standard, glazing was basically literally provided, because most things were just brick and mortar. When you talk about tiles, the new type of finishes. When you talk about issues to do with painting, even now you have new types of paint, roofing, new type of roofing, and so on and so forth. Things have changed. The last 50 years, a number of things have changed. Look at the climate change. That was not a conversation in the past. So things have really changed. Look at rainwater harvesting. The need to do a sustainable construction where you do even do rainwater harvesting. Look at issues to do with universal access to buildings. In the past, 1968, nobody thought about that for you to access a building when all of us can be a candidate.
Engineer, rain harvesting existed.
But it was not...
it's probably not what you have here, but existed, because I know within municipality building codes, a building had to have a gutter, or whatever you call it,
Yes.
through which the water would drain. I know it existed.
And what that draining, what did it need to do? It's called for stormwater drainage.
Yes.
That was there, but it was water to go
Away.
not to harvest for
Bring
use.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
You know, there's something I want to ask.
Yes.
Ordinarily, if we're in an ideal situation, how regularly must a code like this be reviewed?
Well, in the 1968 code, that provision did not exist. In this one, it is now a mandatory requirement that at least every 5 years there is need to review it. This means it has a self-review mechanism provided within itself, so that at least you don't have to either think through or start thinking whether I need to review it or not, so that you start initiating the review process.
Okay, now,
Yeah.
when you came up with this document, that
Yes.
to walk us through the process of coming up with this document, who was consulted, how you went about it, what aspects of the 1968 document is still here, what you refer. Just walk us through it, please.
Very good. That's a very relevant question, and indeed for all of us as stakeholders in the industry. And even you're a stakeholder as far as we are concerned. Because even right now we sit in a building. So we occupy a building right now. If anything happens in this building, we are all going to be affected, either positively or negatively. So the process of reviewing the code to come up with this 2024 National Building Code started way back more than 20 years ago. You remember at one point there was a collapse of a building called the Sunbeam.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
In the middle of town.
Yeah, those who were around that time, I think maybe probably all of us here were around there at different stages of life. And
Yes. Yes, you're right. At different stages of life, yes.
and when this happened, there was a commission that was set up to review or investigate what could have necessitated the cause of that collapse.
Where did it slip?
That commission, actually, one of the key recommendations was to review the 1968 building code then. Remember, this was 1996, this collapse, in the 90s. So fast forward, that recommendation was presented to the appointing authority, which was the president then, and the process of reviewing the code began. So it's been over 20 years or so. Come 2010, we had a new constitution that was promulgated. Before the new constitution, the 1968 building code was domiciled in the Local Authorities Act, if you remember, using the old legal framework. And come 2010 constitution, remember it repealed the Local Authorities Act, and then now we had counties at the new dispensation. At that time, the code lost a home, because the National Building Code is actually a subsidiary legislation, which means a regulation that must be anchored in a primary act of parliament. So now when it lost a home, there was need to bring it to a new home. So come 2020, 10 years later, after the new constitution was promulgated, the National Construction Authority Act 2011 was amended through parliament to include the development and enforcement of the building code. Not 1968, not 2024, building code as it is, whichever date it is. So when that change happened, it now gave the opportunity for the NCA to commence the review of the code, which had started some time back. So through the ministry, because the National Construction Authority, being a parastatal, is under the Ministry of Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development. So through the ministry appointed a committee that now was to conclude the review of this particular code. And that was in 2020, 2021. We took about 3 years or so for the committee to go through the draft regulations, which is the building code. It was taken through all the stakeholders, both stratified and the general public. A number of meetings were held across the country in various counties. It ended up with a draft which was finalized by the Attorney General's office forwarded to the ministry. It was taken through a public, what you call a stakeholder validation workshop. After that, it was taken to Parliament, that both the National Assembly and the Senate.
The Senate.
Thereafter, of course, it was taken there for a pre-publication scrutiny. This is where you take them through to just see what you have before it's finally presented before them.
Yeah.
Thereafter, of course, the comments that were given were incorporated. Then it was published by the minister or the cabinet secretary on March 2024. Upon publication, it was officially taken to Parliament. They debated it through the relevant committee of delegated legislation. After that, it was approved, and 17th July 2024, it was launched officially in Nairobi in one of the affordable housing sites here at the meteorological site, not very far from your offices here.
Yeah.
And thereafter, we are now in the stage of transition, and tomorrow we are doing the launch of the training, sensitization and awareness, so that come 1st March, people will be knowing what they expect and they start implementation going forward.
I would imagine that there's some highlights in this report, and I would imagine that there are some things that folks who are in the industry then would be held or, bound by. What are some of those things that are then different from the 1968 one, whereby we saw lots of things happen? Because essentially I would imagine that what we're saying now is that with this new code, certain things that folks had gotten away with, and I'm even going to call it as far as murder, that then now we will see that those things do not exist, or that those things now are held a little bit tighter in this new code. Is it an upgraded code? Is it a new code? What are some of the highlights that we can see and say, okay, then now we can breathe a little bit easier, knowing that anybody who is getting into this industry or is continuing in this industry is going to be held by certain standards, for which then they will be held responsible if they don't uphold?
Yeah, very good. And I think the same question was actually already asked, and I wanted to, you've added more into it. In terms of whether it's a new code or updated, it's both. It's updated in the sense that some of the provisions in the old code have been carried forward, but updated to make it more responsive to the current trends. It's also new. There are new things that have also been added that were not in the previous code. And quickly moving forward, what are the new things? In the 1968 code, we didn't talk about telecommunications. Today, everything is about data. So this new code has a provision to ensure that every time you are doing a new construction, a new building, there must be provision for services for telecommunication, for LPG gas, and other service, so that you don't have to come and modify or hack the building or introduce certain things after the building is complete.
Yeah.
That's a new change. Number two, we've completely shifted from the old way of measurement, which was, if you remember, the what do you call it? The imperial system of feet and inches into meters and millimeters.
Yes.
That's a new change that we're doing. And even as we upskill the construction workers, that's also something that we need to, because most of them are using footing ngapi. Now it will be the millimeter
Pima na macho.
Exactly.
You do know that when somebody has footing ngapi, it is a generic term for the measurement. So someone say meter tatu. Which
I'm shying away from going there.
Let's not shy, because isn't that what lands us in a lot of problems, isn't it? I mean, if you're going to look at the nitty-gritty of it, engineer, and I'm going to go to a break in just a minute, but I mean, of where these folks are actually doing this thing, what's to ensure that according to the code, I mean, if I have a construction company, and this is the practice for a lot of people, I want to keep my costs down and my profits high, isn't it? So I'm going to use the guy who can Pima na macho, okay? It's true. I'm going to use the person who has been doing this for 50 years because his father taught him, right? I'm not necessarily going to follow this particular code. I'm not going to come and read the code. So in terms of now raising awareness as to what must actually be done, we know that not everybody follows code. In the industry.
Very good. The reason why Pima na macho exists is because of what we call the power of habit and having it in the bloodstream.
It's actually the tyranny of habit.
Exactly.
Because tyranny means that thing has gotten hold of you and you cannot wiggle out of it. Yes.
Yeah. And as we do this, it will actually outface the previous tyranny of habit, as you call it, to the new habit that we must entrench into people. So there will be those who will be in transition period, like some of us. We have been in it for all these years. So for even that change will take a while. But the new ones coming, definitely in 10 years from now, they'll be talking the language that is in this code.
Okay.
So fast forward, because you asked me a very important question about the change, the distinction.
Yeah.
The other one is about flexibility. The old code was very static, that if you are to do a building, the wall must be made of a stone, for instance, and interestingly, they used to say Nairobi bluestone, 8-inch thick or 9-inch thick, 200 millimeter for today's units that we're using. This one tells you what the wall performance requirements must meet, not what it must be made of. If you want to make it of glass, let that glass meet the fire requirements, the strength requirements, and the safety requirements as is. It must not be a certain material. That gives space for innovation. The youth you talk about, there is a provision or opportunity for innovation by as many youths as possible. Youths are very good in innovation because that's where we started the conversation. And as we bring them into this space, any new innovation that meets the defined requirements in the code will be allowed. The new code also gives what I call, it waives, it gives exemption for traditional buildings or construction that is made using locally available materials. Of course, to a construction that is not of high rise, like you can say one bungalow or one level, using traditional materials, like where I come from. Not that I want you to know where it is,
just tell us,
they use cow dung to do the plastering.
Right.
Yeah. Or once they do the mud house, then they, that kind of a house is exempted from this provision, which means as long as it's not risky in terms of safety to the old-B occupier.
Okay.
The other big change is that this particular code also embraces resilient designs. Resilient means a design that withstands the pressure, the forces, anything that can be used for it in terms of earthquake, flooding. Like last year around March, April, remember there was floods. If you had to use this code to not affect us, it will still be there, but the buildings will not be affected as they were because the code provides so. Issues of wind, and so on and so forth. So this code actually in itself is a game changer. It's transformational, and it has what it takes to have a life around us that is safe, a built environment around that is safe and is of good quality.
Standards that people, practitioners in the industry, will be held by. But then the question comes in when we talk about enforcement. A code is to be enforced. A code is to be abided by. Who then will ensure? And I think maybe it's good to start these conversations at the beginning of this thing. So we've had one since 1968. All right. It's clear that not everybody abided to the code at all times. How will you ensure that this code is abided by, to avoid a lot of the catastrophe that we saw, and then maybe to reduce on the severity of the damage of some things, because we know you can't control everything. You can do everything you can to make sure that you abide by code, but then how do you hold or enforce this particular one?
And I think before you even answer, let's remember that a beacon of this country for a very long time has been KICC, whose construction was concluded in 1974. That means it was constructed using the 1968 code. And that is because people followed that code. Others dropped the ball and did not follow that code. So in terms of implementation, that is where rubber meets the road. How will you do it?
Thank you. So the enforcement of the code is clearly provided in the laws that are actually prescribed in it. And to start with, before we get to the enforcement, it is good to understand that for people to be compliant, there is need to have clear understanding, clear awareness, and the knowledge around what you're talking about. So at the beginning, we want to ensure that the entire spectrum of stakeholders are actually trained, sensitized, and adequately made aware of the existence and the provisions of the new Building Code 2024. Having said that, and that's what we are commissioning or launching tomorrow at the Bomas of Kenya from 8 o'clock to 1 p.m. So having said that, it is good to understand that the code is anchored under the NC Act 2011 through the amendments done in 2020 of the same act. And it's clear that the building code, within the act, there's provision for mandatory inspections. So during inspections of any ongoing construction, we will need to ensure that, one, the construction it complies with the prescription provided in the code. And the code has many sections providing for design as well. So we'd expect the designers who are actually regulated through other regulatory bodies to also comply with the code to the extent that they are using the code to guide the standards of their design before they are presented to the relevant approving authority, for instance, counties. So we expect the code also to be enforced through the county, the county governments, under the Physical Planning Act, which also is made reference for. We also expect the same to be done under the NC Act as we carry out our compliance checks. We also expect the same to be done by any actor that is actually supposed to interact with the code as far as their mandate is concerned.
Yes. Okay, so who's bound by this code? Who in the industry? Engineers? Because when we talk about the hospitality industry, for example, hoteliers, drivers, transport people who are, in food and services. So when we talk about this particular code, who's bound by it? And I think about when we see constructions, that whole... What
site
is that thing?
Site signboard.
Thank you. The site signboard and all those many people who are named. Are those form part of the folks who should, number one, have read the code of the 517 paragraphs, must be conversant with everything that they say? Who then will we be able to call and say, excuse me, there's a code that you should have followed, you didn't follow?
Yeah, so in paragraph number 6, it's clearly spelled out. Actually, 6.2. It says who can...
You've crammed this whole thing. Because you're not even looking at it and just telling us paragraph 6.
Maybe you could open it and read it for us.
It's already getting the bloodstream. I've been with it for a while.
Please go on. Yes.
I've been challenged here to confirm.
Well, at least he knows paragraph 6.
Let him read it. After that, he can quote any chapter he wants.
We will not be none the wiser.
Yes.
So I have paragraph 6, part 2, which talks about supervision of construction work. So it says, 6 part 2, a professional under paragraph 1 includes a physical planner, architect, engineer, land surveyor, building surveyor, quantity surveyor, accredited site supervisor, accredited skilled construction worker, duly registered under the relevant law.
Okay.
And of course, part 1 says the preparation of the design and supervision of the works in a building shall only be undertaken by a professional in the respective fields of specialization, which is now defined in part 2. 16.
Okay. Yeah. So you're saying that if I want to put up a building at home, in my rural home, I must have all these people?
You must have all these people, provided the building, yes, and I'm giving a rider, provided the building has what it takes to ensure that it is safe. Because, for instance, if you're doing a building which is made of stones, which is made of concrete, which is made of whatever material you're going to use, there is need to have somebody to guide you into the whole process. The building itself, in terms of space design, will require an architect. I want to believe that you don't convert yourself into some architectural professional.
My house.
Engineer, you should see things.
My house. I am the architect.
I'll qualify that. For you to be an architect in your house, yours is to prescribe what you need the architect to do for you, to the extent of what your house should be as a user, because you are the user.
Architect makes sense. Yes. What do I need an engineer for?
Very good. You need an engineer to... Architect will ensure the space provision, the movement around the house, the circulation, position of doors, windows, and air circulation is as per safe and health requirement for the user and comfort.
Fine.
The engineer will ensure those things fit in space. They don't fall on you when you are occupying the house. The engineer's role is to ensure responsibility in terms of safety and structural integrity of the building.
What do the quantity surveyor for?
Very good. You need money to construct that house. You need somebody to guide you on the cost management of that particular building. If you don't have that, then you are moving into what we call into a dark room or a hole without knowing what to expect. The guidance in terms of budget and cost estimates is the responsibility of the quantity surveyor. Based on the drawings prepared by the architect, based on the details prepared by the engineer, the quantity surveyor uses both. And based on the specifications of materials you want to use, uses all these three documents to prepare what we call a cost and schedule, coordinating body, to ensure that all these are complied with.
Indeed.
And moving forward, this is also done online. So for the counties that are already transited from manual control, planning approval to online, it's very easy because we just check.
Yeah.
But for the ones who still do it manually, when you bring those drawings approved by the county, we still have to carry out due diligence with the relevant county to check that they're
compliant.
Yeah.
Important stuff, and I think very necessary for everybody to be aware of all of this. Engineer Maurice Akech is the Executive Director of the National Construction Authority, and he's been here with us this morning. Thank you very much for sharing those insights with us.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.